We're meeting to resume public hearings on Bill 185, an act to amend various acts. The first panel will consist of the Grand River Environmental Network, the Ontario Home Builders Association, and the City of Hamilton. We'll ask the Grand River Environmental Network to start the presentation.
Excellent. My name is Kevin Thomason, and I'm Vice Chair of the Grand River Environmental Network. Yesterday, you heard Mark Reeser from the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture speak of the devastating impacts the removal of planning authority from the region of Waterloo will have on our farmland, our Mennonites, our farming families, our intensification and very successful urban core renewal efforts, our light rail transit, as well as groundwater recharge areas our entire population of almost 700,000 people depend on. We, too, urge you not to remove planning authority and other proposed changes in Bill 185 because of our unique context for land use planning and environmental protection. The changes being proposed by this government in Schedule 12 of Bill 185 could cause irreparable harm to our communities and will hinder, not facilitate, the construction of new housing. Waterloo Region is a key driver of the provincial economy and one of the fastest growing places in North America. However, our physical inland location and dependence on groundwater presents considerable challenges that our unique regional structure expertly addresses. Unlike most other Ontario cities and communities, we have no freshwater pipelines to the Great Lakes and no greenbelt protection. We are totally dependent on living within the carrying capacity of our land and watersheds. We've had to develop robust regional planning processes and environmental protections that safely balance our rapid growth, preserving our farmland, which is the most productive and profitable farms in all of Canada, while also protecting our essential groundwater recharge areas. The region of Waterloo is a facilitator, not an inhibitor for urban development, ensuring collaboration and cooperation between all 7 of our lower-tier municipalities to achieve complex, coordinated, sustainable development. Despite numerous requests and appeals, Waterloo was left out of the provincial Greenbelt 20 years ago, and a Waterloo moraine that we depend on for almost all of our water needs left with no environmental protections, while we were still assigned the same significant growth targets as the rest of the GTA. In order to balance all of this significant development, the region of Waterloo developed our visionary countryside line policy for sustainable growth, our protected countryside designation to protect the Waterloo moraine, our environmentally sensitive landscapes to protect some of our most vulnerable watershed ecosystems, and also pioneered wellhead source water protection areas. All of our environmental protections are regional, and the removal of regional planning authority jeopardizes everything. The fragmentation of planning across 7 very different municipalities, none of which have the capacity and resources of our current regional planning, will likely result in the duplication, inconsistencies, different interpretations, varying expectations, the erosion of environmental and farmland protections, and a lack of essential coordination to ensure availability of water, sewage, roads, and other infrastructure in our highly integrated and very efficient region. Consider the challenging water and resource sharing allocations our communities must manage. For example, all water needs in our rapidly growing town of Elmira in Woolwich Township has to be met by water coming all the way from the City of Kitchener through pumping stations infrastructure spanning the entire City of Waterloo. Water for the community of Breslau, that is set to quadruple in size in coming years, goes through 3 different municipalities. Likewise, sewage from Cambridge goes to Kitchener, and sewage from parts of Woolwich goes to the City of Waterloo. Furthermore, our shared groundwater resources require coordinated conservation efforts with lawn watering and other restrictions enforced equally across the entire region to ensure adequate supplies. Eliminating regional planning authority and coordination to put all the planning in the hands of 7 very different lower-tier municipalities with little incentive for cooperation and the potential for increasing competition over scarce resources is a recipe for disaster. We need simplicity. Removing regional planning authority won't speed up the construction of more housing in our communities. Instead, it'll make things more complex, significantly inhibit development, introduce new uncertainties for developers, raise infrastructure costs as efficiencies are lost, and endangered water resources that could become an absolute limiting factor for our growth. Having 7 different protected countrysides, several different municipalities administering a single ESL area, numerous municipalities all interpreting the same moraine protections differently and trying to coordinate our complex network of wells, pipes, sewers, pumping stations, and treatment plants with 7 different planning departments, 7 mayors, 7 works departments, and no one in charge of oversight isn't likely to be better, cheaper, or faster. The solution could be as simple as ensuring the Region of Waterloo retains planning authority because of our unique water and servicing situation compared to the other upper tiers losing planning authority that all have few water worries because of their pipelines providing an almost unlimited supply of Great Lakes fresh water, and fewer environmental concerns because of the large amounts of greenbelt protection they have balancing their development. If Waterloo Region does lose planning authority and our regional environmental protections, the provincial Greenbelt must be expanded to adequately protect the Waterloo Moraine and our essential groundwater recharge areas, much like the Oak Ridges Moraine was protected by the Mike Harris Conservative government in the 1990s to secure over 100 headwater areas and drinking water sources for hundreds of thousands of people. In conclusion, while we have other serious Bill 185 concerns, such as the loss of third-party appeal rights, and we would have liked to have time to recognize some of the positive aspects of Bill 185, such as the restoration of some development charges to cash-strapped municipalities, our focus has had to be on the dire consequences of the removal of planning authority could have in Waterloo Region.
1 minute.
We have the most vulnerable water situation in Ontario, and yet, ironically, could soon have the least amount of water protections. We saw in Walkerton how quickly water issues can devastate an economy. And with Waterloo Region and its agriculture, universities, high-tech, financial services, and manufacturing being such a driver of the provincial economy, it's unnecessary to be threatening our water supply, farms, and proven success. Please don't jeopardize, break, or change our planning authority. We already have the visionary, sustainable regional planning and regional official plan that will address our housing needs quickly and affordably with far more housing units than the province is seeking by 2031. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We now will hear from the Ontario Home Builders Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Scott Anderson, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Home Builders Association. And joining me today is Christina Giannoni, our second Vice President of OHBA and a seasoned builder and developer of residential mixed use and master plan communities across the GTA. OHBA is the voice of the residential construction industry in Ontario, representing 4,000 member companies in 27 local associations across the province. Our members include developers, builders, professional renovators, and trade contractors. Collectively, we have the vital responsibility to build the housing supply and the choices that Ontarians need. OHBA continues to be aligned in the government's housing supply objectives of streamlining approvals, ending needless delays, and cutting red tape so that we can get shovels into the ground sooner. That said, we continue to emphasize the theme of any current and future housing legislation that it must focus on stability, consistency, and predictability, and supported by proper transition efforts and provisions to mitigate any adverse effects. Bill 185, an omnibus red tape reduction bill, contains the next batch of proposed policy housing changes that form part of the housing supply action plans that the government has committed to releasing at least once a year. The bill's scope covers a variety of themes and targeted approaches that OHBA welcomes, and to building homes affordably and prioritizing service-ready infrastructure to incent shovel-ready housing supply. However, with respect to third-party appeals, we believe that the province intended to streamline the land use, building, and approvals process to get more homes approved faster and avoid the unproductive delays caused by NIMBY-based appeals that interfere with getting more housing built and improving the housing supply. However, Bill 185, in our view, was cast too broadly and has unintended consequences to eliminating more than just third-party appeals. It's important that there is an understanding of what distinguishes a third-party appeal from others. Second-party appeals are generally landowners that are directly impacted by a proposed official plan or zoning bylaw amendment. Third-party appeals are generally individuals or entities whose lands are not covered by the OPA or ZBLA, but who feels that a change may affect them or are generally aggrieved nonetheless. By not distinguishing between third and second party appeals, Bill 185 treats them both the same and removes the right to appeal for both parties. OHBA supports legislative measures that aim to both reduce the volume of appeals at the Ontario Land Tribunal and allow for increasing housing supply and generating new jobs. OHBA is hopeful that this committee and the government will support amendments during the clause-by-clause review to the bill to preserve second-party appeal rights for landowners where a change to a municipal planning instrument will directly impact and applies to that property. On the issue of abolishing the phase-in provisions of municipal development charge increases, in 2022, Bill 23, the government provided certainty to new home buyers and builders that any new increases in municipal DCs would be phased in over 5 years. This measure was simply meant to slow the pace of DC increases, in turn preserving affordability for housing buyers of new residential construction and provide certainty to builders who underwrite the financial viability of new housing projects. Bill 185, if passed, would most likely place additional costs on new homeowners at the time of closing if municipalities choose to increase development charges in response to the passage of the bill. An analysis of current housing projects in the GTA reveals that DCs could be increasing in the magnitude of $10,000 to $20,000 per unit when DC increases are levied immediately by a municipality. The Ontario housing market, in terms of new home sales, is on life support. The GTHA new condo market reported last month the lowest quarterly number of sales since the 2009 financial crisis. Developers have dramatically pulled back on new sales launches and are reviewing the viability of other projects. And to inject some life, if you will, into the market, builders are currently offering a wide variety of incentives, ranging from free parking spots, reduced deposits on mortgage assistance programs, simply to close out current projects. Given the current macroeconomic environment, this is not the time to allow municipalities to take the new cost of home ownership even more, to make it more unattainable. Ideally, to ensure that housing projects with units that have undergone pre-sale but are not yet in construction, in terms of pulling new building permits, that this could be subject to additional DC charges being added to the price of the home. OHBA recommends an amendment to the bill that would defer the proclamation date to June 1, 2025 for Section 2, Subsection 1. This would simply provide additional time for deals to close and respect the original price offered to the home buyer at the time of the presale purchase when they arranged for the original mortgage financing. If this amendment cannot be supported, OHBA and our members can only hope that mayors and elected officials across Ontario will exercise constraint when it comes to raising development charges overnight once Bill 185 comes into effect. Because after all, who raises development charges and taxes in a housing crisis? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from the City of Hamilton.
Thank you. I am Steve Robichaud, the General Manager of the Planning and Economic Development Department, and joining me today is Anita Fayback, the Chief Planner for the City of Hamilton. Hamilton is committed to streamlining the approvals process to allow for new construction to occur. The City has been identified by the province as a fast-growing municipality. In February 2023, the City signed the Provincial Housing Pledge and committed to putting in place a planning framework that will allow for the construction of 47,000 new units by 2031. In 2023, the City exceeded the provincial housing target by 20%, or nearly 700 units. I would like to acknowledge that Bill 185 responds to issues and concerns the City of Hamilton has previously commented on with respect to the Development Charges Act and the Planning Act in Bills 23 and 109. The City supports those changes in Bill 185 that will help better utilize existing infrastructure through the proposed changes around sewer allocation policies and allowing for the City to establish what is commonly referred to as a use it or lose it framework. Today, I will be focusing on three main areas: the processing of development applications, public involvement in the planning process, and urban boundary expansions. Over the last few years, the City has worked hard to improve the planning process. Since January 2023, the City has met the 60, 90, and 120-day timeframe targets for 100% of the applications received. The success of the City is tied to the formal consultation process that has been in place for nearly 20 years. Having a robust formal consultation process which allows for discussions with the applicant and city staff, combined with an inclusive public engagement process, has resulted in timely decision-making and avoided appeals. The city has created a process where within 6 to 8 weeks of making a formal consultation request, the applicant knows what is required for complete application. It is up to the applicant to move as quickly as they wish to make their application. The formal consultation process helps to resolve issues and provides applicants with staff's position on the merits of the application before they make a formal proposal. The proposed changes in Bill 185 to an optional formal consultation process are not supported by the City of Hamilton. The Planning Act requires that applicants must submit the required and other information with their development application. The other information is identified at the formal consultation stage. Removing the requirement for proponents to consult with the city on the merits of a proposal, which is what is required to be submitted with a complete application and a public engagement strategy, will result in confusion and delay. Proponents will not know what other information requirements will be for a complete application. The city includes community engagement and for applicants to demonstrate how the public feedback has been incorporated into their proposal as part of the other required information. Early and effective engagement is an important step in the process to identify issues and work to a positive resolution of issues and concerns. The city was also moving forward with a framework on how and when applicants consult with Indigenous communities as part of a complete application. The city is concerned that making pre-consultation optional will create confusion on what is needed, leading to an application being deemed incomplete, which will lead to the delay in building new homes. In addition, in the city's ERO submission, the city has expressed concerns with removing the ability to require parking, especially AODA-compliant parking within MTSA areas, and exempting universities from the planning process because this could result in unplanning and inappropriate development happening, which would cause the potential for land use conflicts or create unplanned demand for municipal services such as transit or wastewater upgrades. The city requests that the province not proceed with the proposed legislative changes around formal consultation, parking around MTSAs, and exempting universities from the planning process. Bill 185 proposes to remove third-party appeal rights relating to official plans and zoning bylaws. Based on our review of appeals in the City of Hamilton, the vast majority of appeals to the OLT are for non-decision of legacy files that predate Bill 109. Over the last number of years, public participation in the land use planning system has been diminished to the point where, through Bill 23 and 185, the public will have no appeal rights for most development applications. Public engagement is an important part of the planning process and is beneficial to positive planning outcomes. The city supports meaningful public consultation with communities and for the ability of members in the community to participate in appeals, in particular third-party appeals. The city requests that the province not proceed with the proposed legislative changes around third-party appeals. Hamilton is projected to grow by over 100,000 households over the next 25 years. The city has proactively been updating the zoning bylaw to allow for development and redevelopment to proceed as of right to accommodate growth. Over the last 20 years, the city has issued building permits to allow 30,000 new units to be constructed. As a result of the city's proactive approach to making land shovel-ready, the unit supply within the City of Hamilton has increased by 36% over the last 10 years. And we are doing more. As a result of the recently adopted new zoning regulations affecting over 90,000 properties in Hamilton, accessory units, detached accessory units, semi-detached dwellings, triplexes, fourplexes, and street townhouses are now permitted in any low-density residential area. By doing so, the city has significantly increased opportunities to create additional housing within the existing urban area. To support these land use changes, the city has also lowered and in some cases eliminated the requirement for residential parking. Through Bill 150, by approving Council's decision on a firm urban boundary, the Minister has effectively accepted the city's growth strategy that focuses on intensification, reurbanization, and renewal. The fastest way to build new housing is to follow the official plan and zoning bylaw regulations that the city has put in place and continues to monitor and update these regulations to ensure that lands are pre-approved for development and respond to changing market conditions. However, Bill 185, when read with the new PPS, results in a shift from an intensification-first approach to a greenfield-first approach. According to a report prepared by Hamilton's local home builders, affordability, tenure, and a mismatch between investor units and family-friendly units are the major constraints on meeting housing needs in Hamilton. The proposed changes in Bill 185 will allow landowners to skip the formal consultation process, apply for an urban boundary expansion, and appeal it to the Ontario Land Tribunal in 120 days. 120 days is simply not enough time to receive, review, and assess an urban boundary expansion to ensure that the proposal is fair, sustainable, and fiscally prudent. Proceeding with Bill 185 before the City has been able to establish submission requirements or evaluation criteria in the official plan implemented through a formal consultation process means that proponents will drive the process. This will significantly erode the City's ability to make land use decisions based on the City's growth strategy, public engagement, local conditions, and municipal priorities. This will create uncertainty in the terms of design and delivery of both hard infrastructure and community services required for complete communities. The City requests that the province not proceed with the proposed legislative changes and policy changes in the policy statement around urban boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That concludes the presentations. We'll now start the first round of questions, and we'll start with the official opposition. MPP Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Robichaud. It's nice to see you here today and also to see Ms. Fayback. I want to start by commending the work that your planning department has done, actually all the planning departments across the province of Ontario that have done in response to what I would just call as being actual planning chaos, that we've seen because of the government's thought out changes and rollbacks. If we could just recap really quickly, we saw forced urban boundary expansions, we saw a slew of MZOs, we had, in Hamilton, I'm sure in other jurisdictions, the minister himself meddled in the provincial planning documents by rezoning individual parcels of land. It was unheard of. Then we have the government spending a lot of time rolling back all those decisions, losing precious time in building, helping home builders to build the homes that we need. And then now we're faced with this new bill that, again, I would say has been rushed to the legislature. And I want to say to you that despite all of these changes you have soldiered on, I am going to underscore the fact that you pledged agreed to the province's pledge to build 47,000 units, homes. You exceeded that target, but let's be clear, you met that target within the existing urban boundaries. And so can you just talk to me to confirm that that is true, that was met within the existing urban boundaries, and that that you and just talk a little bit about what must have been difficult and resource draining in your department, your city's ability to keep up with all these changes.
That is correct. Thank you. The City did meet the housing pledge target for 2023 based on redevelopment and new development occurring within the established urban area. The changes do require that we stop work we are doing on, assess those changes, and then figure out what are the next steps moving forward. And that can inform both the development of infrastructure master plans as well as our financing strategy, because those land use changes do have other and broader implications that have to be assessed. And then many times we have done work, stopped that work, had to start in a new direction, stopped that work, resumed new work, and that is one of the issues that we have, and it does distract from staff resources. We will have to take staff off of development applications to respond to provincial changes or policy changes or shifts, and then that means that development applications are not proceeding because we do have finite staff resources. Thank you.
So that start, and waste of resources and time applies to I would say, the public service, and certainly, as legislators. I mean, we have wasted so much time in this legislature debating bills, going to committee, putting forward good amendments that were voted down by the government's majority, and then having them now to spend time, looking at another bill. And in all of this time where we're spinning our wheels, we are not building the homes that we need. In fact, I believe that building starts have gone down under this government. And as we've heard from the Ontario Home Builders Association, they're struggling as well. I mean, we need home builders to have some sense of certainty, because we rely on them to build our homes. So they're an important part of planning in Ontario. And so I want to direct your attention to what you brought up, which is, unplanned demand for infrastructure. And so it's my understanding with Bill 185 that anyone can request the city, or developer can request the city at any time during your planning cycle to have properties, urban boundaries expanded. and that the 120 days of, that would take to go to the OLT and have the decision made gives you, you'll speak to this, it gives you absolutely no ability to plan for orderly, affordable expansion of our infrastructure services like roads, like sewers, like schools, like fire stations. So can you talk about how the city of Hamilton is managing this, given that we already have a significant infrastructure deficit because of downloading?
Thank you. So the city is committed to an integrated planning approach where we bring land use planning, infrastructure planning, and the financial strategy, both hard and soft infrastructure, to the approach to dealing with managing growth within the city of Hamilton. And our current infrastructure integrated planning processes is predicated on the current official plan designations, which is a firm urban boundary. In the event, as I indicated, that an application comes forward for an urban boundary expansion, that will require a diversion of staff resources to assess that application, but 120 days is insufficient, in my opinion and experience, in processing very complex applications. And once that gets appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, then staff resources will have to focus on defending Council's position on a firm urban boundary at the Ontario Land Tribunal, which will divert staff away from dealing with those broader strategic master plan and infrastructure plans, as well as being very difficult from a financial perspective to understand where growth will occur and fully assessing the implications of that growth. That is why the current process of where the municipality leads that MCR comprehensive planning process is a policy-driven approach, which is much more preferred. The same goes to trying to balance intensification and greenfield development and getting that balance correct based on the carrying capacity of the municipality to advance those matters in a timely fashion. Thank you.
How much time, Chair? Just so I... 1.4. Oh, great. 1.4?
1.4.
Oh. So what's left here is that I would like to say that, you talked about that this is devolving into proponents driving the planning process at municipalities, Hamilton and across the province, but it also speaks to the fact that the OLT really is in charge of planning. So the concern is, given that we've seen so many insiders giving preferential treatment, so many insiders being appointed to these tribunals, we now have unelected, unaccountable OLT members that essentially will be making land use decisions in this province. And I would ask you, and I know it's going to be difficult to answer this, but can you just talk about your concern that the good planning process that you have put in place will now be piecemeal and made by both proponents or OLT that may not have any expertise in planning?
The city's concern, that is the concern of the city, that decisions will be made by a third party. And just to put it in context, there's nothing in Ontario in law that requires the owner of the land to be the person applying for an official plan amendment and urban boundary expansion. A developer could apply for a secondary plan affecting my property should council, and I may not realize it, the council may not realize that not all of the landowners are in agreement or aware of it. That could be approved by council. The landowners would have no right to appeal. That is one of the concerns that we have by removing the third-party appeal rights from the process, so that I could end up having the school, the park, and the stormwater management pond put on my property. It may represent good engineering or good best practice, but I would not be able to challenge that.
Thank you very much. That concludes the time for the question. We'll now go to the independent, MPP Hazel.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for your presentation. And I'm going to go to Grand River Environmental Network, Kevin Thomason. Really thank you for your passionate and detailed presentation. And in your presentation, I just pulled out a couple of statements that really resonated with me and a lot of my followers. You were saying there is no greenbelt protection, no environmental protection. And then you also said what you need is simplicity. Okay, and that, stands out to me. So my first question, what were you hoping to see in this Bill 185? And my second follow-up question is, the removal of appeal rights for third parties will prevent groups like yourself from appealing decisions to expand the urban boundary. And do you believe this is proper policy in a democratic society?
Yeah. Yeah, excellent, and thank you for the questions. To begin with, indeed, Waterloo region, we're lucky, is leading the world in so many areas right now. It doesn't matter whether it's in nanotechnology and quantum technology, even on food processing and agriculture innovations. There's just so many things where our community's firing on all cylinders. We're seeing phenomenal growth. In fact, one of the biggest complaints we're seeing right now is too many 50-story buildings being applied for in downtown Kitchener. Not too many towns in all of North America have a problem of too many 50-story buildings. But what we have isn't broken, it's working. And so this is the danger of, by suddenly taking that planning authority and taking it away from the region and delegating it down to different municipalities, because of the complexity of our water situation and all the cross-boundary collaboration, cooperation, everything that's needed, it threatens everything. And the fact that we were never part of the provincial Greenbelt, we don't have all those Greenbelt protections that most of the GTA enjoys, as I mentioned, could leave us in this horrific situation of having the most vulnerable water with upwards of 700,000 people dependent on our groundwater with the least amount of protections in the province. And that's very troubling and concerning and should be of concern to everyone in the province who hopes to see our economy continue to thrive and grow. The removal of the third-party appeal rights is very concerning as well, just because it's important that citizens have an opportunity. We've heard from the City of Hamilton, from Mr. Robichaud here and others about concerns about that, and we need to make sure that citizens have a voice. And in fact, I want to make sure that there is always proper planning and consultation, and that we're doing proper community engagement and citizen engagement. And one of the things that really concerns me with this desire to remove planning authority from the region is we don't know if it's ever even been studied before. Has anyone actually ever done any costing on it? What does this look like? Do we even know what we're in for? And so this is the concern. When we start to skip proper planning processes, we skip that engagement, that consultation, and all those sometimes studies or research or those sort of things that let us know to look before we leap. We've had vigorous debates on what our region should look like in the future. This planning authority removal is coming without any debate or without any conversation or discussion, and it's very troubling to think that we might see it come forward with no understanding of the implications. And from what we can see, the implications could be quite dire.
Thank you for stating that on the record.
We now go to the government. MPP Ray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenters and the presenters for meeting with us virtually as well. I know costs have come up. Yesterday we had Mr. Hudak from Maria here talking about the high inflationary, high interest rates that the federal Liberal government has implemented. I know costs have already come up, obviously, as well. Costs of infrastructure. I just want to point out for the record, for everyone here and those who may be watching this afternoon, that our government's investing over $3 billion in infrastructure over the coming years. That's through the Building Faster Fund, and congratulations to the City of Hamilton getting obviously well-earned dollars for that, getting homes built. Obviously, over $800 million in housing-enabling infrastructure related to water, and over $1 billion in transportation. I just want to say all that because it's very shameful the members opposite voted against it in the most recent provincial budget. Chair, we hear a lot of the carbon tax comes up often in the House of Commons and the Ontario Legislative Assembly. And we heard it's the federal carbon tax around transportation costs and leading to higher construction costs, obviously. So my question for Scott from the Ontario Home Builders is, do you agree the federal Liberal carbon tax is increasing the cost of construction in Ontario?
Good question.
On behalf of builders, every cost that is increasing prevents our ability to get shovels into the ground, not just faster, but sometimes at all. Any factors such as increased development charges, increased cost of lending and arranging financing for developers to be able to initiate their projects, everything that goes into that pro forma to get new developments and new homes built drives up the ultimate cost to the homeowner. At the end of the day, developers can't afford to build houses and projects that homeowners are unable to afford to purchase. So we focus on that and evaluate those pro formas. So in terms of carbon tax, that's one of many factors that builders must evaluate. So if that is going to be increasing the ultimate cost to the homeowner, developers are definitely concerned about how they evaluate their pro formas.
Thank you for that. And I know as I mentioned earlier at a committee and in the Legislative Assembly this week, one of my own transportation companies, they're one of the largest transporters of bricks in the province, and because of the increase to the federal Liberal carbon tax on April 1st, they've seen an extra $60,000 annually on top of what they were paying for transportation costs, which just adds to obviously the costs that they have to pass on to the consumer and the builders. My question again for the Ontario home builders is, I was just wondering if you wanted to comment about the City of Hamilton's comments around the urban boundary expansions.
We look at all matters related to the entire province on behalf of the Ontario Home Builders Association. Individual decisions by councils we look and evaluate as to how that will impact the ability for us to meet the province's 1.5 million homes target. With respect to examining urban boundaries, this is something that has been dealt with across all political stripes of government. I remember back into the 80s and the 90s when they were looking at annexations and amalgamations. What prompts that is the ideal of well thought out, well planned planning. When it comes to these conversations where they have been stalled for many years, it takes sometimes different approaches and different looks as to how you can look at what's required for reasonable and effective planning.
As a home builder, Christina, are you interested in building fourplexes?
So we've been looking into it right now under, again, certain development charge challenges and whatnot. Where I'm building, it's not making financial sense at this time, but absolutely, we'd be interested in doing that and are exploring it.
Okay,
as
thank
a way
you.
of potential intensification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. That's helpful. But Scott, the home builders want to build homes, right?
Correct.
And so the government has as of right for threeplexes, but not for fourplexes. This is the line in the sand that they've driven. I just want to make sure that there's some pressure coming from outside of this House for the government to move forward with fourplexes. We see them as part of the solution, and Bill 185 intentionally leaves it out, even though Tim Hudak was here yesterday, and he was on the Housing Task Force. They recommended this, right? So if we all can admit that NIMBYism can be a problem here, but the comments from the Premier where he says he doesn't want 8-story or 6-story fourplexes. Have you seen a fourplex that is 8 stories high, Scott?
I think the issue that's central here, and when you talk to developers like Christina and her colleagues, this is about the government needing to rely on a multiple set of factors and influencers and actors in the situation to provide that on the ground situation.
Exactly.
So they need to be market aware.
Yeah.
So at this time, the government has indicated a decision pathway. We will continue, as we do on everything across all ministries, continue to provide our advice and our feedback. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when we're looking at developing single-family homes and multifamily, it's like 2 to 3 years in the development cycle. It's 5 to 7 years for a multifamily. Many things change in those periods, and what we're finding is those factors, I think, are affecting some of the decisions, and there may be a lag in that.
That's what we're learning, is that everything, the one thing we know for sure is that everything is changing, and it is changing quickly, right?
Correct.
But it's good to get your perspective on fourplexes, so thank you very much to both of you. Steve, Robichaud, want to thank you very much for the work that Hamilton is doing by trying to stay in the boundaries. This is smart, sustainable planning, and I don't specifically have any questions, but I just want to note that I think that Hamilton is trying to do the right thing and also trying to save taxpayers money for that extra sprawl cost, right? But Kevin, I mean, honestly, Wilmot Township, 770 acres, prime farmland being expropriated, forced expropriation, and also Wilmot requesting a vast number of housing permits, even though we know that there's a serious water issue. So I wanted to, it feels like what's happening in Wilmot is the precursor to Bill 185, and it'll become the Wild West, right? Yeah. And those infrastructure costs are going to be significant. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to highlight why Bill 185 will hinder and not speed up housing in a very clear way.
Yeah. And there's so many concerns. Indeed, this situation with the Wilmot Farmland Assembly, which is seeing a mega industrial site and tens of thousands of homes proposed into an area where development has never been previously anticipated or expected, where we know there isn't the water or the sewage infrastructure existing right now without incredibly expensive pipelines or things like that, is very troubling. And it comes back to that point about proper process, consultation, looking before we leap and make sure there aren't surprises. We don't want a situation like Peel or something like that, where suddenly there's tremendous costs that were never studied or anticipated that are suddenly found partway into the process. And I know one of the concerns of the Wilmot farmers is that if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone, anywhere. And in fact, I've done presentations in the last couple of weeks, just in the last couple of weeks alone, to out in MPP Ray's riding, the Perth County Federation of Agriculture, the Huron County Federation of Agriculture, other farmers elsewhere wanting to learn more about the Wilmot situation because they're so concerned about the lack of process, the lack of consultation, the lack of engagement, the lack of any details, data, studies, research, analysis, or anything. It's all very troubling.
The Ontario Farming Association has presented to this committee. Yesterday, Mark was here. It was the instability and the inconsistency, I think, in the application, and I think the home builders would agree, like have clear rules of engagement so people can move forward, and it'll have a cooling effect for those farmers. But last word to you on that. You got about 30 seconds.
Well, and the planning certainty is so important on anything, whether you're a realtor investor, whether you're a developer, whether you're a large subdivision developer, or that sort of thing too. You need that planning certainty. You need that long-term planning certainty. I think that's one of the biggest concerns with planning authority being removed from the region. Our regional official plan was our countryside line policy. This entire policy of the purpose of the countryside line was that long-term planning certainty.
We need greenbelt protection in Waterloo Region.
Greenbelt is another way to provide long-term planning certainty that sets clear expectations for everyone. And if we're going to lose all our...
Thank you very much. We need more time, but NPP Hazel.
My next question, because I've got 5 minutes and I need to go like clockwork. So my next question is for Scott or Christina. Any one of you can help. Any one of you can answer. Bill 185 walks back the removal of development charges. That was in Bill 23, not even 2 years ago. I hope you're aware of that. What does such reversal lawmaking signal to home builders? Do you feel incentivized to start new projects when the rules can change up on you on any second?
But I guess, one of the questions is sort of why do you think that these local mayors are wrong? Why do you think that they don't have the capacity to be able to lead the charge when it comes to home building and developing in their own communities? And what would you say to them? Like, tell me why you think they're wrong.
Yeah, quite easy. And first of all, the City of Kitchener has had delegated planning authority for about the past 20 years or so. And it was because they eventually grew to the point that they had the staff, the resources, the budgets and such to have some of that required expertise on staff. But certainly when it comes to our 4 rural townships, none of them employ a hydrologist, and yet our region employs more hydrologists than the province of Ontario.
Kevin, I just want to say the only caveat to it was they had to have in-house counsel. That was the only piece. It had nothing to do with hydrologists. It had nothing to do with that.
Exactly. But as I explained in my presentation, the complexity of our water servicing is very challenging. And to be able to plan for our future when you don't have the required engineers on staff, when you don't have the hydrologists on staff, or those sort of things, you're not going to be able to take things into account because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that there is an opportunity for a compromise where you have the best of both worlds, where we still have a region that retains an overall regional official plan that has that expertise and that guiding vision and guiding growth for the whole region. Because sometimes watersheds don't follow municipal boundaries or that sort of thing. You get things like the Laurel Creek Headwaters ESL that falls into 4 separate municipalities with just a few hundred acres in one of it and that. So, but the idea of the region having an overall official plan that guides everything, but delegating that authority to the other municipalities, like Kitchener's already had it for the next 20 years, could be the best of both worlds, where those lower tier municipalities get some of that independence they've always been seeking, but we still have that guiding hand and vision of the region that can efficiently keep those experts there. Because you don't need a full-time hydrologist in Wellesley Township or something like that, but we might need a full-time one across an entire
And
area.
I think one of the interesting things when we look at our townships is they've been really quite proactive at looking at ways to share services.
Yes.
And how they can sort of work together to bridge some of those gaps that I think you've talked about.
Yes.
And we've heard a little bit, obviously, the last couple of days here. We've had some presenters. Mark, of course. Mark lives 10 minutes down the road from me.
Yep.
And chatting about kind of what's happening in Wilmot Township. And it's interesting because I've heard MPP Fife and I've heard you and I've heard Mark talk about how the region really leads the charge on smart planning, and the region is the one who is there for water protection, source water protection, looking after all our wellheads. But the region is the one that is assembling this land, and the region is the one who's putting it together. So I don't think it's fair to try and sort of put this back on the government, saying that we are not doing what's appropriate. We are not doing the right thing. We are opening the door to all these hypotheticals later on down the road, when all we've done is ask municipalities across the province to get shovel-ready sites going so that we could take advantage of the economic prosperity that is coming here to the province of Ontario. We've seen billions and billions of dollars come back to this province. We've seen hundreds of thousands of jobs come back to this province that, quite frankly, were chased away by the previous government. And I don't want to see the region of Waterloo, like you said, which is such an amazing area, such a great microcosm of all the good things that Ontario and Canada has. I don't want to see us miss out on those kinds of projects again, because we have previously, because we haven't had shovel-ready sites. So it's not fair to say that the province is behind this and there's some kind of nefarious thing going on, when it's the region that has taken the approach that they've taken. They are the ones that have chosen this site. They are the ones that have done the due diligence on it, and they're the ones that are leading the brokering whatever real estate deals need to happen. So I do want to give you a chance.
Yep.
I just wanted to get that out there because I think there's so many misconceptions on what's been going on. It's really, really important to make sure that we have the facts.
Well, and thank you. The facts you've just presented now are more facts than I've heard in the last 2 months on this, because we don't have anyone at the municipality speaking to us or answering any questions or agreeing to any meetings. We don't have anyone at the region speaking to anyone or even allowing the farmers to delegate at council, let alone actually answer any questions. And the region points the fingers at the province. The province isn't answering. The municipality points the fingers at the others. It's just this big circular game, so we don't really know who's behind it, what it's for, what the intention is for. But I think just coming back to the overall regional planning, Ken Sealing was our regional chair for 34 years. And for 34 years, he kept all the kids in the candy store playing happily. And that is that and Ken will say that, no, but Ken will, let me finish because we only got a couple of seconds.
If you ask the other municipal mayors, they won't say that they were happy, and they won't say that they were playing nicely together in the sandbox.
Thank you very much. That
concludes
concludes the time, and we want to thank all three presenters for a great job of preparing and for presenting your presentation today. We now will say goodbye to this panel, and we will go to the next group. The next panel is the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, Federation of Urban Neighbourhoods Ontario, and Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. The first we hear from is the Residential Construction Council of Ontario.
Thank you very much. Richard Lyle, I'm the president and CEO of ResCon, Residential Construction Council of Ontario. And on behalf of ResCon, I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to share our thoughts on Bill 185, which is before you for review. I believe most of you are familiar with ResCon. We are Ontario's leading association of residential builders, committed to providing leadership and innovation in the industry. Our members build over 80% of the new residential homes constructed in Ontario. In broad terms, ResCon is supportive of the overall objectives of Bill 185, which prescribes additional policy measures and the modification of existing legislation to support the provincial government's goal of constructing 1.5 million homes by 2031, which is also supported by the other parties. In altering 15 different pieces of legislation, Bill 185 is a comprehensive legislative tool. As you know, there are considerable changes contained within Bill 185, so in the interest of time, I'll just focus on a few of them. starting with development charges. Generally, we continue to retain very serious concerns with respect to regressive and exorbitant development charges. Simply put, they are a substantial impediment to the ability of home builders to construct residential housing in a manner that makes economic sense. Perhaps more importantly, they also represent an unfair, exorbitant, and frankly unaffordable burden for home buyers who ultimately pay these fees. This is especially true for first-time home buyers who have been effectively excluded from the current housing market. The level of DCs, taxes, fees, and levies collected from home buyers is simply incomprehensible compared to other jurisdictions outside of Vancouver. For example, the city of Toronto is up over 30% right now on the cost of a new home. We know that municipalities have very limited tools to pay for infrastructure that supports new home building. However, this burden on home buyers and builders is simply not sustainable. Frankly, we need a new deal on how housing-related municipal infrastructure is financed. The federal government in particular needs to come to the table in a more meaningful way as they collect 40% of all the taxes, fees, and levies on new housing. Also, since municipalities are not permitted to run budgetary deficits as a rule, we would advocate for permissions allowing them to implement measures that would allow for amortization of costs of residential development infrastructure over time. A municipal infrastructure corporation model could achieve these goals. The result would be a more efficient use of infrastructure budgets, expedited residential construction, improved governance, and better long-term planning. With respect to the changes to DCs outlined in Bill 185, we are concerned with the impacts of allowing these changes to be frozen for only a period of 18 months from the date of application for development applications. Even under the time frame the new regulation is replacing, 2 years is already a challenge for builders. There can be a myriad of legitimate reasons why a builder will not secure an additional building permit within 18 months of approval. This should be considered rather than establishing an arbitrary timeline. We're also concerned about the impact of repealing the phasing of DCs by municipalities. The removal of DC phasing is yet another potentially significant financial impact, impeding the construction of new homes and adding cost to the construction process and ultimately for the purchaser who pays the increased cost. Use it or lose it. We recognize that there is a perception that the so-called use it or lose it approach to approved residential housing projects seems like sound planning policy. However, in reality, the application of this power by municipal authorities is actually more complicated than would first appear. In creating a mandatory elapsed date for the draft plan of submission, the provision effectively removes municipal discretion with respect to whether to apply this measure. Similarly, respecting site plans, municipal authority to apply a lapse date to projects is also potentially arbitrary power. Additionally, putting municipalities in the position of having to prescribe a lapse date or by default implementing a 3-year period is also potentially problematic. In essence, these provisions do not account for real market pressures that create an environment where pro formas associated with some residential developments do not make sound economic sense at any given time. The current economic environment is an example of the pressure facing home builders with high interest rates, increased labor costs, exorbitant taxes, fees, and levies, increasing material costs, protracted planning and development approvals processes, and a myriad of other impactful economic factors. Many residential development projects simply evade economic sense in the current environment, and as is shown by the current data on sales and starts. By implementing a use it or lose it requirement, the desired effect of seeking to encourage residential development may in fact create an alternative reality in that removing an application approval makes no economic sense to advance a project currently, only serves to send the proposal back to the beginning and in effect delays home building when a sound business case is restored. Third-party appeals. We were supportive of the provision of Bill 23 that restricted many third-party appeals. A considerable number of these appeals delayed residential housing projects or caused home builders to delay less housing than the site would optimally allow. The provisions of Bill 185 that include official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments in the limitations of third-party appeals is supported by ResCon. However, we would ask that this provision be amended to exclude landowners and builders from the appeal exclusion on third parties. It is important that landowners and builders retain the ability to appeal municipal decisions. Parking requirement restrictions, major transit stations. We support the provisions that prohibit official plans from requiring parking facilities in major transit station areas or where minimum densities are part of the official plans or in any other regulated area. Municipal dating reporting. Yoscon has always maintained that data reporting is critical to more accurately determine the housing situation of the province. We support Bill 185's initiatives concerning information that must be reported on a quarterly and annually basis in 50 municipalities across Ontario. This improved accuracy in terms of the status of planning applications is a welcome initiative. I'd like to see it right across the province eventually, as is it the case in other jurisdictions. Exempting universities from the Planning Act, well, that makes sense both on and off campus, given the dire circumstances facing the lack of students' housing. I won't elaborate on that further. Employment conversions, this is another area of concern with respect to land conversions. This legislation does not address the need to allow for appeals related to employment land conversions through the OLT adjudication process. We strongly urge that such a provision be incorporated into this bill. Many municipalities continue to inordinately oppose employment land conversions on sites where the continued restrictions do not reflect current realities. And there are some sites that have been basically dormant.
Thank you very much. That concludes the time. We will go to the next presenter, the Federation of Urban Neighborhoods.
The Federation of Urban Neighborhoods, or FUN, is an umbrella organization representing resident associations in urban centres across Ontario engaged in planning and development issues. FUN advocates for legislation and policies that not only protect but also empower all residents. Bill 185, released on April the 10th, affects 17 acts, including the Planning Act, the City of Toronto Act, the Development Charges Act, and others. And accompanying this, of course, on the same day, the government released the revised provincial planning statement and a new minister zoning order framework. Our comments on Bill 185 I'll summarize as follows. First of all, under the Planning Act, third-party appeals. This removes the third-party appeal rights to the Ontario Land Tribunal on official plans and amendments and zoning bylaws, including on settlement expansions, but allows developers to appeal their own applications for settlement expansion. The impact of this, coupled with the PPS proposal to allow settlement expansions at any time without any comprehensive review, this facilitates developer-led settlement expansions and developer appeals, resulting in the OLT being primarily a developer-only adjudicative tribunal. That's a problem. Secondly, the Planning Authority, I think discussed extensively previously, formalizes the removal of planning authority from York, Peel, Halton, while setting the stage for further removals from other upper tiers in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. We think that will result in a highly fragmented and inefficient approach to land use, natural resource and infrastructure planning. 11 upper tier governments are being replaced with 89 lower tier ones. Most lower tiers do not have the expertise, while upper tiers still have their jurisdiction over sewer, water, major transportation, transit, and affordable housing. So this allows for a disconnect in planning. Thirdly, the pre-application consultation removes the ability for municipalities to require developers to pre-consult with them prior to submitting an application. Basically what happened was that, under Bill 109, the application time for review was so much reduced that the municipalities have tried to find a creative way to get the information sooner, but this will, sort of getting them at both ends, I guess, will lead to submission of less robust, incomplete applications and pressure on municipalities to make decisions or face appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Fourthly, lapsing approvals, they use it or lose it. The approval authority they now will be able to set an expiry date for site plans and plans of subdivision, a minimum of 3 years. We think this is a good thing. It will encourage applicants to act on their permissions. Fourplexes. Does not require municipalities to allow fourplexes. Frankly, permitting fourplexes has a long history. In my community, we've got semis, fourplexes, as well as single-family homes, and it provides a part of the variety of homes. That's too bad. Application fee refunds eliminates the application fee refund introduced by Bill 109. This now eliminates a type of financial risk to municipalities that was introduced by Bill 109, and we're glad that many of the developers were supporting that removal. The student housing approvals exempts undertakings, whatever that is, of post-secondary institutions from the Planning Act and parts of the City of Toronto Act. The impact is to limit municipalities' ability to plan infrastructure in a comprehensive way for post-secondary institutions and address critical and technical issues through site plan control. Not a good thing. Development charges reverse some, but not all, of Bill 23 changes. The changes reversed include reinstating studies as an eligible cost, repealing the 5-year phase-in. The Bill 185 changes are estimated to reduce the impact from Bill 23 on the City of Toronto, and I heard this at Council just the other day, estimated previously at $2.3 billion over 10 years by approximately $144 million over that same 10-year period, 5%. Long way to go, guys. And so based on the issues and the impacts, especially those which amount to a loss of our democratic rights as citizens, we oppose much of the legislation. But with the exception of the Planning Act changes, the lapsing approvals, the application refunds, and the CIHA to MZO framework, and the Development Charges Act changes. However, we know that additional measures are needed to support the fiscal sustainability of growth, such as for the province to fulfill its commitment to make the city whole. That's the City of Toronto. It hasn't happened yet. Additional changes to support the longer-term supply of affordable, attainable, non-profit and rental housing. And the province to provide direct incentives instead of discounts and exemptions to municipal growth funding tools. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We now will go to the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association.
Thanks very much to Chair Hardman and members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. Jason Berghoff, Executive Director at the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. I refer you to GOBA's written submission to the committee, which I have circulated, and which highlights some of the items to the various EROs related to Bill 185 that GOBA has responded to. There are many proposals under Bill 185 that GOBA believes will help address housing affordability and supply, including reducing parking minimums, addressing zoning bylaw and non-zoning barriers or requirements that frustrate the development of additional residential units, making pre-application consultation discretionary, introducing flexibility in settlement boundary area expansions, introducing municipal planning data reporting and expansion to more municipalities, supporting municipal incentives for economic growth, modernizing public notice requirements, streamlining the process for extending DC bylaws, and numerous modifications to the provincial planning statement, especially the use of Ministry of Finance's population projections. GOBA's prime concern is housing affordability and supply for the residents of Ottawa and those across all of Ontario. And in order to increase housing availability and achieve our goal of 1.5 million new homes over the next decade, we need housing legislation that provides stability, consistency, and predictability combined with proper transition provisions. And while there's a lot of good in the proposals for Bill 185, there are 3 proposed changes which are of concern: repealing the 5-year phase-in on DC rates, the language around third-party appeals, and reducing the time a DC fee is frozen upon application from 24 months to 18 months. My colleague from the OHBA in the previous panel spoke to these, or most of these before, so I'm not going to repeat what he had to say, but I wanted to provide committee members with examples of how these issues are playing out or are expected to play out in Ottawa. First, third-party appeals. Currently, the City of Ottawa is developing a new zoning bylaw following approval of its official plan in 2022. This is really its first comprehensive zoning exercise since amalgamation. But as we detail in our submission, Ottawa's official plan underestimates its population growth and housing demand. This allows it to artificially limit necessary land expansion, but just as important, it allows the city to limit permissible zoning below what it actually needs to put in place, especially around LRT stations. So the city is not going to provide the as-of-right zoning needed to accommodate growth in major protected transit station areas, and landowners within those PMTSAs will not have the ability to immediately address this underzoning. Instead, they will be forced to apply for a rezoning or an official plan amendment, which the city will eventually deny, and then that decision can be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So you can see how a municipality can frustrate the province's good intentions and prolong the construction time, as well as the cost of critical housing around higher order transit that would allow residents to live more affordably without a car. Now, we understand there's some openness to revising that language and in that provision to ensure that landowners' rights are retained. Suggesting wording can be found in our written submission matching OHBA's, and we strongly urge committee members and all MPPs to see those modifications through. The second concern is repealing the 5-year phase-in of DC rates. Phasing in DC increases over 5 years ensures cost certainty, protects project viability, and supports housing affordability by allowing home builders to plan ahead more effectively and provide better pricing to future homeowners and renters. As detailed in our submission, the proposed repealing of phase-in hits just as the City of Ottawa is enacting a new development charge bylaw, which will go into effect next week on May 21st. Before Bill 185, the city was looking to extend its current bylaw because it had not yet completed significant background study work, including updates to its transportation master plan and infrastructure master plan. However, once the prospect of being able to push through a significant DC increase became available without the mandatory phase-in, the city rushed its work in order to do so. It originally proposed increasing DC rates by 28% in the core, 24% in the suburbs, and 40% in the rural areas of Ottawa. Through our technical questions, the city's consultant found an error regarding the number of households being used to calculate the charge and revised the increase to about 12% within the built-up area of the city and 20% in the rural area. Ottawa City Council approved the new rates at its meeting just this morning, although we have yet to see a revised background study that supports these figures. The city also was originally not going to provide a transition period from the old DC bylaw to the new one, and therefore these increases have come into effect literally overnight for hundreds of already purchased homes and planned rental units. Our third concern is reducing the amount of time the DC rate is frozen upon application from 24 months to 18 months. This simply doesn't reflect the reality of getting approvals through the city, certainly not in Ottawa. Ottawa, and I'm sure many other municipalities across the province, use and abuse development charges to pay for things unrelated to growth because it's easy to burden new home buyers and renters with additional costs. And I want to provide you 2 specific examples from the Ottawa DC. One of the line items in the DC bylaw is a new Olympic-level swimming pool that's intended to draw swim meets and new tourists to Ottawa. New home buyers are paying the majority of that project. What does that have to do with growth? New home buyers are also paying 100% of the interest on the construction costs of Phase 1 of the LRT, a transit line that's been open for 5 years, serving existing communities and that replaced an existing bus transit way. New home buyers, starting next week and conceivably for the next 10 years or more, are paying for that cost. We urge the government to work with GOBA and OHBA to amend this proposal to ensure that housing affordability and supply are protected by allowing the DC phase-in to continue, ideally through its intended lapse in 2026, but as a minimum through June 1st, 2015. With that, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the presentations. We'll start the first round of questioning with the independent. MPP Hazel.
So thank you everyone for coming in and presenting on this lovely evening. And your presentations were very detailed, and I really appreciate that as well. And so, Richard, I'm going to go to you, Residential Construction Council of Ontario. And you spoke about, in your presentation, you hit a line that is very near, there, and close to my heart is, first-time home buyers. And I think of the young people getting into the market, and it's already like shut out of the market. And with the DC charges, that is going to impact them and become, even for the unaffordability for them to reach that milestone. For the record, can you detail that? Because that's a concern for me and should be a concern for many of us.
So sure. I mean, one of the things that we did was I was part of a group that commissioned a study on taxes, fees, and levies in total on new housing. It had never done before. And the number we came up with was 31%. So on $1 million of, new housing, you're basically looking at $310,000 in taxes, fees, and levies. Simultaneously, and not connected with us, there was a similar report done in BC that came out a few months later. Their number was 30%. And I can tell you that there's no other jurisdiction in North America that comes remotely close to those numbers. And the fact is that they're, not income tested fees, they're per unit fees. The people that get hurt the most by them are the new home buyer, and especially those who can least afford to get in the market. So not surprising, we're in a situation right now where we really can't produce new housing, new market housing, which is 85-90% of housing supply for the middle class, and certainly not, for first-time home buyers, unless they've got parents with very deep pockets. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem for economic development, for growth of any kind, for well-being, for social value analytics. The quality of life is falling. And for young people and young families today, it's a nightmare. And we need to fix it. That doesn't mean to say that, DCs, we just need to find another way of supporting infrastructure and growth management aside from DCs, because they're just on their face, they're regressive and punitive and unfair. I mean, we don't treat income tax like this or anything else. I mean, it's not the Canadian way.
You're right, it's not the Canadian way. I support you fully on that. What would you have rather seen in this Bill 185?
Well, I think eventually, I generally like the bill. I think we've got more to do because, if you look at our sales started plummeting last year, and no surprise, we said we're going to have a problem coming. So now today we're seeing housing starts falling, which is a problem. And the reason for that is that it's not just interest rates. Interest rates are, one part of it. The only way rates will really big effect on housing is if they were to drop like 200, 250 basis points. And that's not going to happen. But at any rate, this problem is way bigger than just interest rates. And it's the way we, again, tax housing. And then, of course, there's the approvals process, which even though there's been many changes made, there are many problems still embedded in the length of time it takes to get projects through to approval. So, a new formula has to be created involving all levels of government and how we support infrastructure growth, because infrastructure and growth generally is to the benefit of the entire community and shouldn't be borne just by new home buyers.
Yeah, I always know that we have these amazing, brilliant organizations like, every one of you that is sitting at this table. And I'm hoping when you do your pre-submission, you also send some solutions, right? But thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. That concludes the time. We now go to MPP Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the presenters for coming in person, and for Richard for joining us virtually today. My first question is to, I'll start with the Greater Ottawa Home Builders, and then I'll go to you, Richard, as well, so same question. So I was just wondering, Jason, if you could comment on the proposed changes in the PPS, the provincial planning statement, especially around commercial conversion and the transit pieces within it.
Yeah, are we up? Okay. Yeah, no, there's not enough time to detail everything, of course, but yeah, there are a number of good changes in the provincial policy statement. Office to residential conversion is especially important in Ottawa, where we have significant footprint of the federal government, and especially downtown, and the divestiture of those buildings. And what, the key to revitalizing downtown is converting those buildings into residential so that you have the people there to support that core economy once again. And also transit, Ottawa is looking to get 25 to 30% of all its housing around transit station hubs, around LRT, which I kind of spoke to of, it has that desire in its OP, but then is limiting it on the zoning side of things. So it's another critical piece to push forward for Ottawa in order to to achieve the housing targets that it has, even though I believe those housing targets are a little under. I think the most critical piece, and I did mention it in my remarks, however, is using the Ministry of Finance population projection numbers, which would allow every municipality across the province, not to even have to do that work. Mike Moffat, who's a much smarter person than I, and I think most people recognize his name, we were talking about this the other day, and he said, that he felt that those numbers, and those are the numbers he uses for all his demographics and his household demand projections across the province. Felt that those were the best numbers that you can get for housing demand and population and migration for across the province. It would just allow us to set a base, and we wouldn't have to have a discussion then about, is 400,000 in Ottawa, is 400,000 the correct number, which is what the OP is based on, or is it 650,000, which is what the ministry puts forward. There are a lot of political reasons why Ottawa went with 400,000, as I said, to limit land expansion and to limit zoning. So again, I think the ministry, using the Ministry of Finance numbers across the board, is the single most critical, important change that's been proposed.
And Richard, same question around the proposed PPS, especially around commercial conversions and the transit pieces within it.
Wow. Well, conversions are great, but they take time, and very few buildings are really suitable for conversion. So, but it takes a long time to get there and get those things started. It's like government land. Transit stations, just to lift the restrictions around transit stations on height, density, and parking. I mean, one thing I would say right now, I take this opportunity to do that. We really are in a deep crisis. I mean, if you look at the condo market in Toronto, as tower cranes come down, they're not going to go back up again. The market has basically cratered. It's very hard to sell anything right now that's new. And the system needs to be shocked, because a big part of, again, if you go to that $1 million worth of real estate, the increases in development charges and sales taxes on new housing in the last 15 years is a down payment today by itself. And that's shocking. And we're updating those numbers. I should have it by the end of the week. We'll have a new chart on what that looks like, but it's really quite devastating. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't things that need to be paid of. And the point was well taken about, what's the alternative look like? We've visited other jurisdictions in the world, and we've seen how they actually manage this. And they do, because it's not just a housing crisis that we have. We've got a growth management crisis on our hands. We're not managing growth properly. So, the less, the better. And in other jurisdictions where we have measured 45 different government agencies, commissions, and so on that have their finger in the approvals pie, other advanced jurisdictions have a third to a quarter of that. It's much more simplified and much faster. And where they've modernized, digital twinning, GIS, building information modeling, where you've got modernized systems where you have predictability and accountability that actually encourages more projects and applications to come forward to build, say, for example, along major corridors and avenues. And these are some of the further advances that we still need to make here, so we need to shock the market. We need to give the first-time home buyer a chance to tread water, because right now they're underwater.
Thanks, Richard. I know, as those will know, and you will know very well, we're removing parking minimums around protected major transit areas to let the free market sort of decide that aspect. So an aspect to reduce costs, and hearing that from our Ottawa home builders as well, costs today. And so whether it's inflation, interest rates, parking minimums, costs contribute to a lot of that aspect and the challenges we're currently facing. So I just want to get your opinion quickly. Do you believe or agree that the federal Liberal carbon tax is increasing the cost of housing in Ontario?
Oh, it's increasing the costs. And that's not just the only thing. There are other challenges that we've been facing with respect to increased costs in the pursuit of climate change measures. I mean, in Ontario, we already build, we're ahead of every other jurisdiction in North America, except for BC now, most recently, that's adopted some new measures. But, adding additional costs onto consumers. is, we're going in the wrong direction. We're still increasing our costs. We can't do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Richard. I just want to get to Jason. On the same question, do you believe the federal Liberal carbon tax is increasing the cost of housing in the Ottawa area?
I mean, to be succinct, of course. But it's on every input within a house, construction materials and transportation and everything else related to that, and that has an amplifying effect because of course it's at the base, and then as you build your way up. So yeah, no, there's a significant portion there. I don't have a good calculation as to what that is, but at an increased at an input, it increases everything.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the official opposition. MPP Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the presenters for coming in today and being here online. I know you have busy lives, and I'm always interested in to hear what you have to say. And I also carefully read your submissions. This is a very detailed and thorough submission, and I appreciate it. Makes my job easier. I have questions for all three of you. I'm going to start off with Richard Lyle from ResCon. Thanks for being here. So I have three short questions to start off with. We've been asking the Ontario government to permit fourplexes as of right in towns and cities across Ontario. Is that something that you're also advocating the government do?
Yeah, in our view, the fourplex issue is sort of a non-issue. I mean, a lot of municipalities are already doing it, so why not do it? But the argument of 3 or 4 plexes is kind of relative to the bigger crisis that we're facing is not terribly important, but certainly we support fourplexes.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
We will be introducing an amendment to allow fourplexes as of right. We know the government has moved forward with 3plexes as of right with Bill 23. That was a move we supported in that bill. The housing crisis is what it is. I believe we need, multiple measures from all levels of government to address the housing supply shortages we have and the housing affordability crisis we have. The second point that I noticed that you spoke about was the issue around having higher density near transit stations. I'd like to know if you could just speak a little bit more about that and what you'd like to see the Ontario government do.
Well, the less restrictions, the better, generally speaking. And in there, I would look to, for example, one of the most successful, I would argue, city in the world that we don't pay a lot of attention to, and we should, is the Greater Tokyo area, which has the population of Canada in it. They don't have the housing problems that we have. They don't have the social housing problems that we have. They don't have the infrastructure problems that we have. And we're actually going back there this fall to the Japanese home building show. And it's also, they are world leaders in modular off-site construction. So there's a lot to be learned there, but they have they do not have the restrictions that we have. So, around major, urban transit hubs, just let the market dictate what is needed there. Why, we keep trying to play around with capping things and limiting things to 30 units or three plexes or whatever else like that. Just, we can't, no stone can be left unturned in dealing with this housing crisis. It is monumental, and it's getting worse, by the way. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Our pipeline, if you talk to our subcontractor associations, their business pipeline is pretty much dry, and we're laying off people now. So, we talk about the lack of skilled labor. We've got hundreds of crews sitting at home now, and it's getting worse. So we need to turn that around. This is kind of like the early 90s. The thing that saved the industry then was the nonprofit housing boom that happened in the early 90s. It kept our crews working until the market started to recover. We're in the same situation now. Make no mistake about it. And I don't mean, and I'm not fear-mongering here. I'm looking at the numbers. And one of the problems why data is so important, because a lot of our data we're dealing with lagging numbers. There are other jurisdictions in the world that have up-to-date data as of that week or as of this week. We do not have that information. And if we did, people would see what was happening. So, we're in a pickle.
Thank you for that. We also see the value in the government playing a greater role in providing financing and access to public land in order for the development sector and municipalities and the government itself to move forward with building non-market housing or a mix of more market housing with affordable housing. It's certainly something that we've seen work quite effectively in other provinces and states. Another question I have is, I recently introduced a motion to do what BC and Quebec allow, which is to permit the stratification of a home so that it can be converted into 2 separate homes for purchase. Other cities that have and states that have faced housing crises, from Oregon to BC to Quebec to California, have moved forward with this measure because it provides first-time home buyers with that cheaper option to buy a home that's a little smaller. We're talking maybe 1,200, 1,400 square foot, but it's a whole lot cheaper than a single-family home or even a semi-detached home. Is that something that ResCon has looked into, allowing stratification?
Not directly, because I understand the bulk of our industry is in sort of subdivision work, major projects, high rises, and so on. But having said that, we have engaged and partnered with groups like Habitat for Humanity, St. Clair's, social housing. We recognize that, there are people in our society through no fault of their own that just simply can't afford housing, and they have to be looked after. I mean, that's the Canadian way again, right? So we've gotten involved with various projects like this, and most recently with Habitat, for example, on the taxes and development charges on new housing, because those development charges are hitting Habitat homes too. And Habitat's market now is middle-class people, which you never thought you'd see that. So, sorry, I lost track of the question there.
No, that's fine. It seems like you don't have a clear position on that, and that's fine. I was just curious.
Sorry, what is the position on the
stratification?
Oh, yeah, no, we don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I mean, all these things are good things. And in fact, I was going to say, and we have that happening in an informal way in our market now in the Greater Toronto Area, where houses are being bought, single-family homes, and they're being divided up into 3 family homes.
Correct. Okay. I have 30 seconds left. Okay, and my next 2 rounds will be with you two. I feel pretty good about the reduction of development fee or the improvement in the development fee measures that are coming in with this bill. And the reason why is because municipalities have a huge amount of challenges that they're facing right now with infrastructure. In the City of Toronto, we've seen a property tax increase, which has been significant. It was, I think, 9.5%. And I am concerned about any measure to reduce development fee charges, given the situation that many people are facing. If developers pay less development charges, then who makes up the difference? Who do you recommend should make up the difference?
Well, this is where a new formula needs to be reached between the 3 levels of government, because the development charges and fees are not paid by developers. They're upfronted by developers, which is a problem in itself because it actually kills some projects coming forward. But it all comes out in the wash. It's the consumer that pays for it. It's a consumer tax. It's just disguised as a development charge. When you hear people say—
Thank you very much. That concludes the time. We'll now go to the independent, MPP Hazel.
And so my next question is for Federation of Urban Neighborhoods, Ontario, and so for Jeff. This bill also supports sprawl, okay, and takes away appeal rights. My question to you, the government task force report made it very clear that there is enough urban land to build the housing we need. In your view, why is this government, why do you think the government is so determined to go after the farmlands, and what would be the risk to the farmlands? This can happen, and we've seen it happen recently.
You're referring really not just to Bill 185, but also to the PPS, where conversions of industrial land to residential and so on are going to be facilitated more easily, and locking residents out of appeals, fundamentally undemocratic. It's really important that we actually, plan things in a proper way. The conversions in my area have been, they were organized. There was a municipal comprehensive review and reports written that gone up to council, and they made a decision. Now it's going to be open season. We're going to lose our industrial, our employment lands. These are closer to home to me than the agricultural lands, but it's a similar issue. And we desperately need to retain jobs in the city. How can you do that if the lands convert to residential? Where these people are going to work is a good question.
So I always like to ask with this bill, what would like to have seen differently with this bill? And what are you hearing from the grounds from your organization?
Well, some of the stuff that we mentioned, 2 or 3 things which were supportive. Some of them are just rolling back earlier mistakes by the government, in Bill 23. And some of it is, a lot of it, I would say on balance, most of it is a problem. Seems like the government is trying one thing after another, to try and make amends, but it's not happening. I did say that lapsing approvals. Certainly in my area, we've got a dozen buildings approved. Only 2 or 3 of them are moving forward. So this is crazy, right? There needs to be some incentive to actually get shovels in the ground, just to use an Orwellian term. And
What's the incentives that you're not seeing that you need to see? What does that look like?
We really don't know. We really don't know what those incentives are, because it seems like there's a rush to get approvals, but the approvals simply, allow
1
a
minute.
developer to take the money, and then what happens? Well, somebody else then builds, right? And that's the problem, that we're allowing speculation. We're not managing the speculation, and therefore the building isn't happening. We need to somehow manage the speculation.
Well, thank you for putting all of that on the record. That's it for me.
Thank you. We now go to the government. MPP Harris.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and again, thank you to all the presenters that are here in our last panel of the day. And let's talk about building. Let's talk about incentives, and let's talk about what is a huge disincentive, and that's high interest rates. And when you have properties that are green-lit, ready to go, but interest rates are so high that you can't literally afford to build the building, that doesn't help anybody. So I'd like to start with ResCon and Richard. Tell us a little bit about what it's like trying to build right now with these high interest rates, and how builders want to build, right? That's the whole point of being a developer, a home builder, a community builder, is you want to build. And how are these high interest rates really becoming a disincentive, and how are they preventing you from moving forward with building quality housing here in Ontario?
Well, I mean, it's sort of to a certain degree self-evident. It's a huge problem. The bigger problem that we have too with interest rates is that we basically have to go along with the U.S. The Bank of Canada has only got so far it can move, and I think they did go too high by, that's our view of it anyways, by maybe 50 basis points, and when they increase rates, and I think they have to come down. The danger is, of course, the U.S. economy's on fire. The U.S. economy has productivity growth. They've got real income growth and so on, and we don't have that. And that's largely a problem related to, federal policies and how things have been, frankly, bungled there. But interest rates are a huge problem. And then when you factor in, as I mentioned, what is a down payment today? It's an increase in taxes, most of which, the bulk of which, is going to the federal government. They've been making out like bandits on housing taxes, which were supposed to have been adjusted to inflation when they were, originally, and it never happened. So as prices went up, and we had this economics of scarcity sort of bubble happening, and then you increase DCs. I mean, how can you have development charges increasing 900% in a decade when real income growth has been actually negative?
It's a major problem for sure, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And your comments, I think, really resonate with a lot of the folks that are here in this room. I wanted to turn it over quickly to the Greater Ottawa Home Builders and maybe just get some of your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, as Rich said, it's the cost. It's the cost of financing. Is if a 100-unit apartment building costs $300 million to build, do you want to borrow that money on 5% or 7% or higher? But it's as simple as that.
And it just to be clear, builders don't have droves of money stashed away just waiting for this next project to come along. Like you're taking out essentially, call it a mortgage if you will, or you're looking at financing large sums of money to be able to upfront the cost to be able to build these places.
No, you're right. Every project is financed. You put up your deposit or with the collateral that you have to, the proportion with your bank. But it's banks and lenders demand big margins on that in order to even move forward with any project, and then you build the interest rate on top of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, and I'm going to turn my time over to one of my colleagues.
MPP Barnes?
Thank you. I have a quick question for you. Richard, you talked about managing growth. Now, when we talk about managing growth, what does that look like? As you said, one of the things that we need to do and we are not doing right now is managing growth or looking at the numbers that manage growth. I'm just curious as to what that looks like.
Well, let me put it this way. We talk about a housing crisis, but as I've said, we've actually got a growth management crisis because you can't look at housing in isolation. There's housing, there's infrastructure, there's healthcare, there's educational elements to it, and like we're looking at building schools in high density urban environments, things like that. And then you've got other associated factors. So it can't be looked at in isolation. And it's complex, and we need to run, and we have the capability of doing this. We've got to start simulating what we're doing. So in other words, we keep having these announcements on different things. Well, what does it really mean at the end of the day relative to the 1.5 million target, which everyone has accepted? So what's the actual plan to get there? There have been some, that's been broken down to a certain degree. But we can actually run simulations using big data analytics, which is available to us, but we're not doing it yet. And we need to do that. We need to modernize and digitize the entire system. That has been done in other jurisdictions. We're actually far behind other advanced jurisdictions in how we manage this. And in fact, the OECD has us, second last in our approvals process out of 32 developed countries. It's no mystery. So we have to and can improve this. And I think that's going to happen. So we can do it, and I think it's going to happen. It's just that the magnitude of this problem, it kind of crept up on us. And COVID and the interest rate increases were sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. But there was a lot happening before that made our housing supply system dysfunctional. And the market has to work because the market's 85-90% of housing supply. The state cannot step in and substitute to there. And the best incentives are to reduce the costs. And the biggest cost that went up, in the last 10, 15, I mean, they already did it on purpose-built rental housing. They cut the HST on that, which was good. And there have been some measures there with respect to development charges. Well, whether you rent or own, it's just a matter of choice, economically speaking. So we need to do that for first-time home buyers at a minimum to get them back in the market.
Thank you. My second question is for Jason. Jason, you listened to Jeff in regards to the speculation or getting builders that are just speculating. What is your thoughts on that?
I don't think there's a lot of appreciation for the spectacular risk that home builders take on in order to do these projects, and the investment of years and millions of dollars for those sorts of things. It's not something you don't turn a piece of land around in a year or 2 years. It's 10 if you're really fast. You can do that. That takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and again, a lot of sunken money to do that sort of thing. All of which has to be basically upfronted by a developer in order to produce that housing, which is, we also somewhat dismiss that as a product as opposed to the communal good.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the official opposition, MPP Bell.
Thank you very much. I've got questions for you, Jeff, as well as for you, Jason. So my first questions are to Jeff. It's good to see you again. What's Fund's position on fourplexes? Are you in support of Ontario moving forward with fourplexes as of right in towns and cities across Ontario?
Yes, basically, yes. Certainly, as I said, fourplexes exist in my community. They exist everywhere. I don't know what the issue is, really. It makes a lot of sense. You've got, basically it's a double duplex, right? Or a double semi-detached. It's an obvious building form. It's a box divided into 4. It makes perfect sense. What is the issue?
We don't understand what the issue is, and I think there's a lot of Conservative members who feel pretty comfortable with fourplexes too. Unfortunately, I think we need to get a message to Premier Ford that Ontario is ready for fourplexes and that it's time to move ahead with that. I will be introducing an amendment in this bill to call for fourplexes to be allowed as of right. My next question is around the development charges issue. As I mentioned to Richard, I've been very concerned about the municipalities not being made whole. They've lost their ability to collect sufficient developer fees to pay for infrastructure at a time when Toronto has a property tax increase rate of 9.5%. That is significant. One thing that we are asking for is for development charges to be permitted for affordable housing. The City of Toronto is currently not allowed to collect developer fees for affordable housing at a time when we've never had an affordable housing crisis this bad or a homelessness crisis, this significant. What's Fund's position on permitting the City of Toronto to collect development fees for affordable housing?
The basic development charges should not be, they're almost, I hear in the conversation almost like they're negative. They're something not to be, they're simply the cost of development. They're not a tax. It's almost implying that there's some kind of tax, but it's just the cost to allow the grant and allow the services for that development. It seems like totally appropriate and has to be paid for. And that ability's been taken away. In terms of affordability, the government asked Toronto and all the other municipalities to report on inclusive zoning by July of 2022. That's almost 2 years ago. Hurry, 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 get in your plans, 15%, 20%, whatever it's going to be. And we're still waiting. And the City of Toronto is still waiting for. So all of these developments, we've got so much development's been approved by the city, none of that's going to be affordable because none of it is within the confines of an inclusive zoning approved plan.
There are over 104 applications at the City of Toronto that they've made to the provincial government to permit inclusionary zoning near transit stations, so that all new big developments would have a percentage of affordable homes allocated in that development, and we've just been waiting for 2 years. My next question is to Jason. Jason, honestly, this is such a good briefing note. I really enjoyed reading it. My question to you is just around the position of 2 things. Fourplexes in towns and cities as of right, if your association has a position on that. And then second, if your association is advocating for higher density along transit routes as of right, what's your position on that as well?
Sure. So yes, GOBA rather has certainly pushed for units per lot as a policy that should be adopted across the province. It is something now that the City of Ottawa has introduced in its draft zoning bylaw, more because of its agreement with the feds under the Housing Accelerator Fund, which I mean, a spade, I'm not sure the city really wanted to do, but nonetheless accepted in that way. I think often where things get caught up on the 4-unit question is often people start relating, saying 4 stories as opposed, and so I think we often get caught up in the stories versus units question, and one of the proposals that we have in one of our EROs here, I don't remember which one of the 7, but it's in there somewhere. Let's simplify this discussion and talk about height instead, and not units. And let's talk about, whatever, let's set it 11 feet as, your low-rise height for, less than an R4. In Ottawa, it's R4. That would be the solution there. Sorry, what was the second question?
Increased density along transit routes.
Yes, significantly so. And if anything, we've been highly critical of the city for not putting zoning high enough along transit. And as I detailed in my remarks, the zoning around transit stations, around LRT stations in Ottawa, is not been rezoned at all so far, and is not being proposed to be increased significantly in the proposed bylaw, the zoning bylaw that's going to be under scrutiny by Ottawa for the next year and a half, because it's not producing the amount of units that it should. In Ottawa, and I would imagine in every municipality across the province, housing units are mostly apartments, because we're talking about high density apartment buildings for the most part, or condos, should be the housing that is most affordable that any municipality produces. The ability to live on a transit station and have a more complete community around you, should be an obvious goal. I can't speak for every municipality, but certainly it's baffling that the City of Ottawa doesn't push that more.
1 minute left, right?
1 minute left.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question about a related bill, so if you don't have the answer to that, it's fine, but it's something that I'm following pretty closely. In a previous bill, the government moved forward with a definition of affordable housing, where developers get a development fee exemption if they build an affordable home. That I believe it was about 60% of average market rent, and we're still waiting for the bulletin to be released that will tell us what the exact affordable housing definition is for each region, I believe. But at that time, some of the stakeholders were concerned that even with the DC exemption, builders weren't going to build it because they couldn't recoup their costs with the rent price as it was. ResCon or GBHA, do you have a position on that, whether the affordable housing definition is going to work to build affordable homes?
Richard's trying to talk.
I think Richard. It's classic. We all
sorry. I was going to say, the affordable housing definition, like attainable and
Thank you very much. That's very, very well designed. We want to thank you. The time is concluded for that question and for that panel. So I want to thank the presenters in this panel for all the time you took to prepare, and all the great way of making the presentation and answering the questions. It's very much appreciated. With that, I would also like to remind the committee and those present that the deadline for written submissions is 5 p.m. on Wednesday, May the 15th. That would be 5 o'clock this afternoon. So I guess not too many people are going to put it in the mail. But anyway, that's the deadline for submissions. And with that, are there any further questions from the committee or comments? Yes, MPP Harris.
I have a motion to move around filing amendments, Chair. If that's okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I move that the deadline for filing amendments to Bill 185 be rescheduled to 12 noon on Friday, May 24th, 2024.
Okay, you heard the motion. Debate?
would you be able to give us an explanation as to why you're changing it?
It's just what we believe is an adequate timeline, and we'll be moving forward with it. I'd like to call the vote, Chair.
Is this a motion that they're moving?
Yes, he's moving a motion for the committee to agree to extend the deadline, which the committee has the power to do.
So that's there on the screen.
Spring?
There it is, yeah.
Whether you vote or not, it's still gonna go through.
Any further discussion?
Yes, I've been here for 6 years, I know that.
Are you ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Motion is carried. So, any further questions or comments from the committee? If not, the committee is now adjourned until 9 a.m. on Wednesday, May the 29th, 2024.